if Ukraine is a moral struggle, which I've put forward, it is a moral struggle, I believe that the United States should not use its economic institutions to allow Russia to use America's economic institutions to help fund the war, right? By us unfreezing their money, like, oh, take it all and use that to fund more tanks and more bullets. And I don't think most Americans want that, because they think that's immoral and they want to support the other person who's defending a young democracy. What I'm asking you is to ask you something which was clearly a moral struggle, which was a struggle against apartheid. Do you think the United States should have sanctioned Apartheid South Africa if Apartheid South Africa sanctioning them would cause an increase in inflation?
Dylan, it's a retarded question.
Answer the question. Don't dodge it like a bitch. I'm sorry. Stop being a bitch. You gotta answer the question. Come on. This is a simple question. Everybody understands what I'm trying to ask you.
Dylan, thanks for coming. I think it's actually pretty exciting to talk to you. You're a pretty big deal relative to me with my 10 viewers, so appreciate the time.
I'm excited as well.
Yes, I do want to first say that, oftentimes, I was saying to Alec before, oftentimes these discussions get into these super convoluted arguments about the history of Russia or Ukraine. And it's not to say that the history doesn't matter. But what I find often is the case there is that a lot of us did this research sometime within the last couple months. And the idea that we're passionately arguing about something that we really don't have a personal attachment to, it all comes across pretty dishonest to me. I think you're an exception to that, being over there. But I also think, first and foremost, you're an American citizen. We come from an American perspective. And so I consider the American perspective, or I guess I would, to be honest, I feel like I speak from an American perspective. So I'm most concerned with the American people and how this war is affecting their lives. And I would argue the funding of the war, the support of the war, has had nothing but net negative impact on the standard of living for Americans, with really no benefit to speak of whatsoever. I think it's a losing war, regardless of the outcome. I really don't think Ukraine stands a chance of winning. I think that, worst case scenario, this could end up in a nuclear war kind of scenario. I just don't see why liberals who traditionally hold the anti-war view are suddenly becoming like empire simps. So that's kind of my take.
Sure. So did you want me to talk to him, or did you want to talk to him? I'm just confused exactly what you wanted.
Since Non-Smoker was the guy who wanted to come on, and I kind of threw a curveball at him. He knew you were coming on. Don't get me wrong. I told him.
Okay.
And he agreed to all the terms and everything. But Non-Smoker, I'll leave it up to you. Would you rather this be a conversation between you and me, or do you want to have it with Dylan and then I just kind of listen?
I think what makes the most sense, Alec, is given the fact that you said you don't have a lot of prior knowledge. It might make the most sense for me and Dylan to talk. And you and I could have the same discussion at a later date if you'd like.
That's totally fine. Are you fine with that, Dylan?
Sure, that'd be fine with me. Can I use the bathroom quick so I just don't have to do it in the middle of the discussion? Okay, I'll be right back.
Morally corrupt,
sure thing.
bankrupt man.
I'm back.
All right, excellent.
So I guess I'll start. I think there's two parts to the points you made. I think the first part was this is making the war worse and it's a losing effort anyway.
For Americans.
Americans are supportive of it. And then there's a second part to it where it's this also doesn't benefit the United States. And as an American, I care about America. So, the rest of the world is the rest of the world. It is what it is, right? That's the two parts to it?
More or less. I'm not trying to suggest that it doesn't matter at all what happens in the rest of the world. What I would suggest is that we may have our individual or even collective concerns about what happens in the rest of the world. But historically, our attempt to go in and fix the problems we see in the world has always ended in disaster.
I guess I would contend with that.
With World War II.
Yeah, I mean, there's World War II, there's Kuwait, there's Yugoslavia. There's a lot of examples, I think, where we did intervene, and I do think we did a good thing, even if, of course, no war is perfect. It's war, for God's sakes. But I like the idea that the America is inherently an evil force in the world, and if it touches a thing, it just degrades and kind of corrodes, I think is really kind of a Bush era interpretation of the United, you're kind of have to hyper fixate and kind of cherry pick from America's interactions with the world to come to that conclusion. I don't think America is inherently exceptional. like a lot of people do, but I also don't think it's exceptionally evil. I think it's an actor which many ways operates in its own benefits, and sometimes it can be on a force for good or sometimes a force for evil. It depends on the conflict, depends on the war. I think our support for Taiwan is a righteous support. I think it's a good thing that we're supporting Taiwan, for example. I'm very supportive of Taiwan. It's the same belief I have about Ukraine. So just because it's America supporting it, I'm not just going to come off of it like, oh, America bad, therefore we shouldn't do it because America always fucks up everything, because I also don't believe in that.
I think that in the process of trying to explain that, you've cherry picked 3 examples from like numerous examples where we've gone in and totally fucked everything up. But I would also argue that, I agree with you that it's not like America is uniquely evil by virtue of being America. I mean, that's what some of the more radical communists think, usually like anarchists or Maoists, like America's not worth saving, just burn the whole fucking thing down. I don't believe that either. But what I'm arguing is that the process of propping up empire is capable of doing a lot of evil that doesn't really benefit anybody in America in terms of the American people. And it kills lots of other people around the world, causes destabilization, which we then need to continue to expand empire to compensate for. So I think it's sort of like a losing battle on every front.
Mhm.
But I'm interested when you talk about Yugoslavia and Kuwait, why do you choose those 2 examples as like positive examples of interventionism? I mean, I would imagine with Yugoslavia, you're going to go into the whole like genocide thing, correct?
I would probably go somewhere near all the war crimes and atrocities are being committed, and us intervening shortened what was a long and civil war with much ethnic strife and war crimes that had no end in sight until NATO involvement. But I don't want to like devolve into like a debate about Yugoslavia and Kuwait. That's something we could talk about for hours probably.
Right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I have a straight up question for you. Do you draw any distinction between imperialism and annexation, or are they the same thing?
Do I draw any distinction between imperialism? Sorry, I'm messing with my lights right now. Imperialism or annexation? I think annexation can be part of imperialism. I think it can be part, but I think there can be a difference between annexation and imperialism. Because, for example, like let's say that Ukraine annexed territory that was taken from it, like Ukraine. Let's say the world internationally recognized Crimea for whatever reason, and then Ukraine took it back. Would that be imperialism? I don't really think so. I don't think that would be the case. So I think it would be a case-by-case basis whether an annexation was inherently imperialism. There could be instances where a state democratically decides to be annexed by another state. I think imperialism has become kind of a buzzword that kind of gets like thrown around when any one state is aggressive towards another state, or when any country starts shooting at another country. But I wanted to say to you, I didn't choose those examples because I wanted to give that's the fair representation of how America engages in the world. I brought those examples to just show that America is an actor. And it's not an exceptionally evil actor or an exceptionally amazing actor, but it's an actor that can do both good things and bad things. And just like I thought those were good examples of how America was involved in the world, I think what it's doing in Ukraine is an example of America doing a good thing in the world and protecting this nation's sovereignty, defending a young democracy which had a democratic revolution, and defending the Euromaidan revolution from 2014, which many people are trying to uphold. And so I just think this is on the right side of one of the many things America has done. This is one of the goodies, one of the good ones.
Yeah, so I think you can then appreciate, to some extent anyway, the more cynical view on it, that it's actually not necessarily this good-natured defense of democracy, but it's more about building and maintaining spheres of influence in the world, pressuring Russia, in the case of Taiwan, pressuring China. And I find that oftentimes, if you even suggest that's the case, you're often like dismissed right out as like a Russia apologist or a China apologist or a Russia simp or a Russia propagandist or this or that or the other. But the fact of the matter is, we are using these scenarios to pressure other global powers for the maintenance of our hegemony, right? Like we want unipolar world order. That's sort of been the policy of the US post Second World War, and particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the maintenance of that revolves around pressuring these countries. If we were so concerned about spreading democracy, why wouldn't we be doing that in the many places in the world where democracy is absent? I mean, we do business with Saudi Arabia, which I don't think you would really argue is like a pure democracy, would you?
Of course not, but I think states are oftentimes hypocritical, and I think somebody can do something for multiple reasons. I think that we would not be giving Ukraine as much support if it wasn't a democracy. I don't think we would be supporting it as much. I don't think other European states would be supporting it as much, and I don't think the international community would be supporting it as much, and it would have gotten as much support and so much sympathy from the international community as many foreign volunteers, and I probably wouldn't be here as well. I think that there's a combination of factors as to why the United States supported Ukraine, and the fact that it's a young, fragile democracy that we've worked very hard with to try to protect, try to deal with the issues of corruption and deal with these issues of a failing social safety nets and many issues that Ukraine have, which should all be addressed during and after the war. I think it's a combination of factors, but of course, like all states act within their own self-interest. That is the nation. That's the very nature of nation states. I just think that it is within the self-interest of all of Europe and America for us to be allies with democracies more often also than dictatorships like Saudi Arabia, a monarchy, which is brutalizing Yemen. There's a reason why there's international support for Ukraine, but there's not much international support for the Saudi Arabian intervention in Yemen, even though Saudi Arabia is within the American sphere of influence. Why? Because there's no sympathy from the international community for the Saudi intervention. If you go to the Americans and you say rah, defend Saudi Arabia, that's not a thing. It's because it doesn't.
It's like international support, if anything, for Saudi Arabia's actions in many cases. Like there's the idea that like we are in Ukraine because it's some blooming, budding democracy.
In large part, yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, you do know that Ukraine, based on the corruption perception index, is rated 122 out of 180 in terms of its level of it's one of the more corrupt countries in the world.
Yep.
Based on like third-party analysis. So how is that like a budding democracy that we're attempting to like somehow, I don't know, protect from what exactly? Like I don't really follow that reasoning. In fact, the United
States started as a genocidal state which raped black women enslaved in chains. Democracies are inherently flawed things, and there's going to be no democratic project that started as this perfect, respectful, no problems, no issues whatsoever. If you look at any point me to a democracy that started out with no corruption. Point me to a democracy that started without large-scale civil strife or violence on the streets. A lot of democracies, a lot of democratic revolutions had these issues. Whether it be like in Germany and in America, everywhere. I mean, right after America started, there was actually a farmers' rebellion almost immediately because of many of the issues with a young American democracy.
So, okay, can you point to me a democracy that needed foreign intervention for it to continue growing and budding instead of working out its problems internally?
The United States, France.
Okay, well, we needed the French intervention, you're saying, in the American Revolution to establish our independence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm saying, can you name me a country that's needed foreign intervention once the country's borders have been established and it has its own independent government, that's needed foreign intervention to maintain its status as a democracy? Okay, go on.
I think Taiwan, without American support, would no longer be a democracy.
It's not
do you not think that Taiwan's a democracy, or?
It's not a country.
Well, it is a country.
No, it's not. Okay. Nobody seriously considers it that other than separatists and radical people in the States.
What's this? Wait, what's this?
That's a lighter.
No, it isn't. Okay, neither me or Alec consider this a lighter. We consider this a lighting apparatus.
If we didn't made an illegal agreement that wasn't a lighter, then I could understand why you would bring that up as an example. But you know why we didn't make that legal agreement about that lighter is because there's no problem with international recognition of that.
The problem.
Do you know why?
Let me ask you a question. When did China become a country? When did China become a country? Was it?
In its current government, 1949.
But it wasn't internationally recognized as the sovereign government of China till like the 1970s.
In fact, what's interesting about China is the U.S. didn't officially recognize the PRC as the legal government of China until the 70s. We recognize the ROC as the legal government of China.
Exactly.
That's really, but
so do you think that China didn't become a government until 1973?
We only did that because we didn't respect China's sovereignty to such an extent that we were trying to actively foment rebellion against them, during which we actually proliferated the drug trade in Burma and all these other countries.
Why would that change? Why would that change whether or not China was a country, the People's Republic of China was a country in 1949 versus 1973? Because the world didn't respect them? Well, I mean, you could say that about a lot of...
Half the world did.
The majority of nations did not. The majority of nations did not recognize them as China.
Do you have a source of that?
I mean, the majority of... They didn't get the UN seat. The majority of nations did not recognize them until way after 1949. You want like a source like when the majority of nations like established embassies? It was after 1949. What I'm trying to get at with you is I don't think international recognition is what establishes a country. I think that's silly because if tomorrow everybody spited, let's say tomorrow we said this is the Soy Act, and what we're going to do is we're all going to say Russia no longer is a country, and we pass that and all the countries remove their embassies, that wouldn't magically make Russia not a country. Russia still has currency, its own currency, has its own flag, it has its own established borders, it has its own military, it has its own government, it has its own policies, it has so many things that is what is a country, it has its own anthem, has all the things and all the flourishings of a country. I think they're countries. I just don't think those countries have a right to exist.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, I mean, you can believe something to be a country and also doesn't have a right to exist. Like I believe the Reichskammer whatever pact was like a country. I just didn't believe it exists. It had a right to exist.
In your opinion, your personal opinion.
In my personal opinion, I do not believe the LPR, the DPR should have a right to exist. They should be wiped off the face of the earth. Yes.
Wow. See, this is what I mean by like you guys are you are the pro-death position.
Wow.
Like you support lots of people dying.
I believe the Nazis should have been wiped off the face of the earth.
All right. Well, not everything is about Nazis, Dylan.
Well, no. Is that a pro-death position? Because I supported the bombing of Nazi Germany.
Okay. Well, in the case of bombing Nazi Germany, obviously I would agree that that was the right thing to do to stop the Nazi war machine.
Why are you so pro-death, man?
Okay, well, in your case, Dylan, you're for promoting a war where there isn't, a fucking genocide going on. There's a big difference, right? And in the case of bombing Nazi Germany,
is that the standard?
You're trying to prevent a genocide. Now you're talking about killing possibly hundreds of thousands of people just because you think this region that you learned about 6 months ago.
6 months ago. Okay, I didn't learn about it 6 months ago, but
you did?
No.
Sorry, 8 months ago.
I've known about it for years, sir.
Okay.
I was gonna say I don't think you would have traveled to another country that to study it.
Well,
I only learned about it when the conflict first started.
Building his channel. This is all about building his channel.
Do you not think this is anything like personally motivated by me having friends here, or like a personally ideological? I mean, let me ask you a question. How much was my channel growing before I came here and how much after? Because I can tell you my growth slowed because my content changed drastically because most of my viewers just want to watch me debate people, not like interview refugees. That's not what the content meta on Twitch is not debating. The content meta on Twitch is not interviewing refugees and aid workers. It's like hot tubs and shit. Like it's not that. I don't.
What was your rate of growth before you left and what was the rate of growth since you've arrived?
My rate of growth, well, I'm making, I think I'm making half what I used to make off of Twitch and YouTube.
So you're saying you lost viewers by going over there?
I've lost viewers and I've lost money, yes.
Really? That's surprising. Have you lost money in terms of like your overall income from those platforms?
Yes.
Really? That shocks me. Because I honestly don't buy whatsoever. Very cynical take on what you do, Dylan. And it's not to say that it doesn't take a degree of bravery to put yourself in harm's way. But I actually don't think anything you're doing over there is really helping anybody. I think you're going over there, you're sort of putting the war behind a lens right? And then you're trying to demonstrate to all of your viewers, hey, look at all the horrible stuff happening to Ukrainians. This is why you should keep sending money over here. Your tax dollars
Well,
should
yeah,
go over.
I'm also like funding like vests for the Ukrainian military and aid workers and medical bandages. I'm actively supporting the Ukrainian war effort. Absolutely.
Real quick, I think my take on it is he's just going over there to document what's going on. I think if you are donating personal funds, Dylan, that's your business. But it just seems like, from my understanding, you're doing a documentary. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm interviewing. I want to basically interview locals, get their perspective on the war, and like film and give people a mostly unfiltered view of the war. I don't like how CNN covers war because it's like, here's 5 minutes of war footage, it's like 3-minute interview. It's all soundbite nonsense, and I wanted to do something that's more unfiltered.
They have the exact same take that you do.
Yeah, but I want to present it differently. You can agree with someone's opinion and think they make a bad argument. For example, let's say someone came in here and said, I don't think we should send weapons to Ukraine because Ukraine is run by a Jew. You would be like, well, I agree that we shouldn't send weapons to Ukraine, but that's a very bad argument, right?
What is the difference between CNN's argument and yours?
I think the difference is that I work harder to humanize people and give them more in-depth conversations. And I think those types of things are just not possible on a massive multimedia company that has to deal with advertisers that have to like jump in and like push tampons every like 10 minutes. They can't play 30 minutes of a conversation with the Ukrainian talking about what it was like to grow up in Kharkiv and talking about Euromaidan and like pro-Russian violence.
Coverage, not argument.
Well, yeah, I want to do a different. Okay, then I think the change would. Let me change what I meant then. What I meant was, I want to present it differently because I think I present it in a way that is more appealing to certain people that aren't captured by what the mainstream media presents. Like, I think a lot of people are dissatisfied with how mainstream media covers war, and that's something I wanted to approach.
Interesting. Yeah, but I don't think the argument's any different. So I think your example is not really great. Listen, this isn't a perfect message. Perfect measure of your growth, but I do see a noted increase in your trending on Google since the start of the war. What do you make of that?
Awesome, but I'm not making more money and I'm getting less views. Like,
you don't think you're really going to deny? Like, okay, I'll be honest.
Do you want me to send you my bill for the last month?
Just real quick.
Listen, I'll take your word on it. But the idea that this hasn't done marvelous, promotion for your brand is kind of dishonest.
I'm not saying that it can't. No, wait. Let me be clear. I do acknowledge that this helps me, but this helps me in a way of like, it makes me more professional than what I was before. Because before, what I was mostly known was being like a debate host. I hosted debates and I hosted like basically a clown show where people would come on and watch people yell at each other, right? And that's something I'm not interested in doing really much anymore. And I think the main thing this is helping me do is distance myself more from that and move on to bigger and better projects that I care about and allow me to enter a more professional realm. But the main motivation personally for me going is because I'm ideologically committed to the struggle. It's the same reason when I said wipe off the face of the earth. I didn't use polite language because I'm not polite about it. Right, you can call me a radical. That's fine, but I am very radically committed to this Ukrainian struggle for independence and democracy. I'm gonna be here until they win. I'm gonna come back every once in a while to like say hi to family, stuff like that. But then I'll be back here in January.
Just real quick, even if this is a clout, like it's like at least partially a clout grab, even if you were to concede that, I do think that it is important to put that into the context of like what. Regardless of that, like objectively is being done over in Ukraine. So I'd like to bring the conversation back over to like, should we be funding them? Is Ukraine let's go back to the conflict is my point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I mean, I do have a lot of criticisms of that. Maybe we could talk some other time, but okay. What you mentioned something before that's really important to me. You said that nation states do what's in their best interests, right? Something akin to that. And, it's not always good. It's not always bad. It's differentiated, which I think, that stands to reason, makes a lot of sense. Okay, but when you talk about the interests of the nation state, typically what I would think that to mean is that it has some sort of benefit for the people in the nation. And in the case of the war in Ukraine, this has been disastrous for the American people. It's created, supply issues with oil, right, which has led to inflation being enhanced, right? The reason is, as the cost of oil goes up, oil is an input for the production of everything. So as the price of oil increases, the price of everything increases. Now in the US, I've talked to other streamers about this. There's multiple reasons why we're seeing rampant inflation here. It's not just the war in Russia, but the war in Russia and the war in Ukraine is exacerbating the inflation here. And the only way out of that inflation here is the Federal Reserve raising rates a crazy amount, a short amount of time, and basically initiating a recession. So what you're seeing is the American people here not being able to afford, standard things. I mean, gas prices are coming down a little bit, but I don't know if you heard today, OPEC is going to cut supplies, right?
Yep.
So we're going to see an increase in the price of oil again, right? We're going to see an increase in gas prices. That kind of stuff is devastating for the average American, right? Like a family of four who, the mom has to drive to work, drive the kids to school, whatever, like, we shouldn't underrate how bad this is for regular people. And yet we're just being told again and again, like, oh, we have to do it to save democracy. We have to do it because of war crimes and all this stuff. But we see all these places in the world where there is no democracy, where we do nothing. And we see other places. A good example is Armenia and Azerbaijan, where the Azerbaijani military is carrying out war crimes. We're not doing anything about it. So it always seems dishonest.
This is a lot. You're saying a lot. Okay.
So it always seems dishonest to me that we're this vanguard of good, right? And the American people pay for it, right? Literally with dollars or with their lives, when inevitably we have to get involved in the war directly, which in this case, I think is only a matter of time.
I agree. We should have supported the FSA more in their struggle for democracy. That'll be the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is, earlier you talked about the difference between Nazi Germany is they were engaged in a genocide. That's different than what's going on now. Now, the New Lines Institute did publish a report how there is the risk of genocide occurring in Ukraine, but I won't make the claim that genocide necessarily is occurring. But the Russian army is a group of thuggish brutes who should not be allowed in any other country due to their conduct in this war. The mass graves that have filled up in Izium and Bucha, now that today we just discovered another one in Lyman. The atrocities of the Russian military are absolutely fucking atrocious. That's not to say the Ukrainian military hasn't also committed atrocities, but the scale of it is to compare the American military to the Nazi military during the Second World War in the scale of the atrocities. For an example, the Soviet military raped Berlin. They fucking raped a lot of women. It was terrible. But the Nazi military committed more atrocities than the Soviet military. And so it is the moral imperative to support that Soviet struggle against the Nazis because the Nazis were worse. And that's not even to say that the Ukrainian military is anywhere near the Nazi atrocities or the Soviet atrocities or anything near that. But the Russians are brutalizing the country. They don't care about the locals. That's why they're perfectly willing to take them to torture chambers and torture them, brutalize them, beat them with pipes, and fill up mass graves. And so you can say maybe this doesn't meet the standard of genocide, but it isn't like genocide is a magic word that like once you pass this path, then people have to get involved. And now, because before that, there could be millions of evil things a human being could do that should be prevented, like torture, rape, murder, filling up of mass graves, executions of civilians, all things that the Russian army has done in Ukraine. And they've done it en masse. And they've done it pretty openly as well. They're not even that ashamed of it. Many of there's actually been a lot of audio that is leaked from Russian soldiers calling back home where they're almost like bragging about raping Ukrainian women and killing civilians. And so I would say that this is a massive humanitarian catastrophe that needs to be stopped by not guaranteeing that the Russians get to keep the land that they've taken and continue to brutalize this population in perpetuity like they did in Crimea with Tatar activists killing them and throwing them in rivers. The solution is to push the occupier out so they cannot continue to brutalize the occupied. As to the second part of this question about like America as like a vanguard for good, I don't think America is necessarily a vanguard for good. I think America should be stopping all military support for Azerbaijan. I supported Nancy Pelosi's visit to Armenia. I think the United States should be more involved in the states where it's not, diplomatically necessarily extremely beneficial to the United States to stand up and say we support democracy. Another question of that would be Western Sahara. We should not have thrown Western Sahara under the bus for Israel. That was a negative thing we did. And I'm going to stand up and say those things. We should drop all military support for Saudi Arabia and their intervention in Yemen. We should sanction harder the military junta in Myanmar that is partially being propped up by the Chinese through their arms deals with them. I support democracy across the board. It's something I feel very passionately about. So you're not going to get any opposition from me saying that, hey, America should be more consistent on its principles. Of course it should. If I believed America was acting perfectly, I wouldn't be involved in foreign policy. I would just say, oh, they're doing everything perfectly. Why should I get involved, right? Why is my voice needed? But when it comes to this, 1 second, I'm trying to remember your last point. Can you remind me what your last point was?
Gas prices.
Gas prices. If you poll the American population, the vast majority of Americans want to support Ukraine. Now, if you ask them a follow-up question, what if our support for Ukraine through military or economic means leads to detrimental economic impact in the United States? 62 to 64% of Americans still want to go through with it. That is a massive amount of support from the American population. And the thing is, I think Marx actually said something about this, where he said, when talking about like things like slavery and like evil deeds that populations participate in. I don't remember if it was Marx or which philosopher he said, but there's this idea of like how evil deeds weigh down upon those who do them. And even though, of course, the one where the evil deed is done to, they're the main victim, there is something about a society and its guilt around evils like slavery, around terrible oppression, and that weight society should not hold because it's bad for those societies. And I also think people like to be involved in not slaughtering a population by helping to grease the wheels of an economy, brutalizing the Ukrainian population. And it seems the majority of Americans agree with me that they're willing to deal with the negative economic consequences of supporting democracy and supporting the self-defense of Ukraine, because Americans, I think when it comes to it, they're a moral people if they know what's happening. But the problem is there's so many people lying to the American people about what's happening in the world that sometimes they push them to do fucking ridiculous nonsense like invading Iraq, which the American government had to lie about to get us to invade. And so when it comes
manufactured consent.
Noam Chomsky, I have a lot of criticism of the man, but it's a book that you can read. That's all I'll say about it. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is I think Americans want to act morally on the world stage. And supporting the democracy in Ukraine and supporting their self-defense is an act of Americans acting morally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you familiar with like polling that also says most Americans want a quick diplomatic ending to the war?
What do you think? Oh, of course. Everybody wants a quick diplomatic ending to the war. Everybody wants it. So do Ukrainians.
So I think what the contention I would have with what you said is, you're kind of making it sound like most people here just have no problem with, rampant inflation, economic depression, all this stuff,
I never
just
said
for
that.
the sake of protecting Ukraine, when in reality, I think we want the conflict to end as soon as possible. And that doesn't seem to be the position of our ruling class. I think they want the conflict to just continue onward and onward. I don't think there's really an end goal in sight here. Because the idea that like we're going to just, keep fighting Russia tooth and nail forever and forever, and that eventually they'll just back off and it'll end, is like not a very likely scenario. Russia's going into partial mobilization now. You're probably going to see you're definitely going to see major increases in terms of the size of the Russian force. It's only going to get more expensive. This is only going to drag on longer. I don't see like how, you're making this, I would say like moral judgment about most Americans that, oh, they're perfectly fine sacrificing this, that, and the other for the sake of Ukraine. And I think it's important for me to acknowledge that most Americans are in support of Ukraine. That's a fact. I'm not denying that. But what I am denying is this idea that like there is no limit to that. There's a very obvious limit to that. And as material conditions continue to deteriorate here, the support for this conflict is going to deteriorate as well, right? And you're going to see that with the oil prices first and foremost. That's why this OPEC thing is such a big deal. we were able to kind of suppress prices with strategic reserve, releases, okay, which was sort of flooding the market. So OPEC now has to cut production to save their own ass, right? And now we're going to see an increase in oil prices again. And I'm telling you, Dylan, like, it might be hard for you to fully appreciate that. I don't know what kind of economic background you come from, but for most people, it's a big fucking deal not being able to like totally afford to like drive to work or like keep their home warm during the winter. And the idea that like, hey, this abstract place you never fucking heard of until months ago is going to be safe if you just keep paying for it and, you just go without heating oil. And sorry, I think we have to acknowledge that like this is impacting the American people negatively, and that maybe in the short term, some Americans are okay with that, or maybe a lot are okay with that. But I think in the long term, there's a very obvious limit to that, and we're pushing right up on that.
When you say the short term, I'm interested in what you mean by the short term, because we're 9 months into this thing and the vast majority of Americans still support it. The vast majority of Germans, who have been hit a lot harder than we have, still support it. Actually, more Germans supported than Americans. I think it was like 72% of Germans supported compared to 62, which actually surprised me considering Olaf Scholz's actions well enough. Continuing German support for Ukraine. Continued German support, German governmental support for the government of Ukraine. 72%. That's German, right? Now, the difference is people hear the reaction of the German government, but Olaf Scholz is not the German people. He is a representative elected by the German people. He will not necessarily always demonstrate the German people's will. The same thing can be said about the French people as well. The British are another people who are extremely supportive. Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Poles, Romanians, Moldovans. I mean, these are all people who are incredibly supportive of Ukraine. It's also interesting that all the nations who have experience similar with Russia historically when it comes to their colonization of their lands also seem to support Ukraine more due to the sympathy of being in their position before. But this idea of like the economic deterioration of the American state, I do not think we're going to deteriorate because of Russia as economically. I think the factors that are pushing America in a negative economic direction are not that related to the war.
They're directly related to the war.
I don't think the majority of them are that related to the war. No.
Dylan, it's like really simple economics. The price of oil goes up, the price of everything goes up. It's
the price, I understand that. But the issues that we had economically were both, okay, well then.
Can I just explain quick?
Okay, explain my economic worldview, yes.
No, not your economic worldview. I don't know yours. Maybe you're of the opinion that it doesn't fucking matter and I'm in Ukraine anyway getting tons of money from McDonald's and who gives a fuck. But what I'm saying is that in America, as inflation keeps going up, you're right, it's not the only factor driving inflation. That's absolutely true. There are multiple factors driving inflation. The problem is it's also adding upward pressure on inflation in addition to a whole host of other things. The only way the Federal Reserve can take care of that, can reduce inflation, the only fucking way, is by upping interest rates and instituting a fucking major recession. It's coming. Whether we want it to happen or not, it's gonna fucking happen. Okay? And so I think what I'm trying to get across to you is that it's not just this short-term increase in gas prices, which, again, I think the media really downplays from this elitist standpoint of like, oh yeah, we can afford it and all this bullshit. And like the average person, the impact of that in the short term is bad. In the long term, it's really bad. But the recession, which will lead to people losing their jobs and all of this stuff, could be catastrophic, right? So I really think that you should probably be a little bit like aware of all of the economic factors domestically at play here, right? It's not just about, the war, yeah, it's upping oil a little, but fuck it, Slava Ukraini. What I'm saying is that it's one of many factors that's impacting the economy negatively, okay? And either way, we're going to be in a recession. And when that happens, when people's material conditions deteriorate rapidly in a short amount of time, usually what follows is wide-scale social unrest. So I think we're like right up on that. I don't get how you can't see that.
Okay, so I don't think we're on the precipice of wide-scale social unrest. At least as like if you mean like revolution or like fucking massive riots in the streets over stop support for Ukraine, because as you talk about representing the average American, again, the average American does not agree with you. The average American takes the opposite position to which you have. The average American agrees that we should continue to support Ukraine, as does the average European, who again is being hurt more by the economic consequences of this war, since they're more directly tied to Russian energy infrastructure. But I have a question for you. Do you think we should have sanctioned apartheid South Africa if it meant an increase of inflation in the United States?
Apartheid South Africa and Ukraine have nothing in common.
Please, can you answer the question, please?
No, because you're asking me a hypothetical.
Please. I'm asking. No, my question can explain what my question's rooted in. My question's rooted in, right? If Ukraine is a moral struggle, which I've put forward, it is a moral struggle, right? You can disagree with that if you want, but I'm putting forward that it is a moral struggle, right? I believe that the United States should not use its economic institutions to allow Russia to use America's economic institutions to help fund the war, right? By us unfreezing their funny, like, oh, take it all and use that to fund more tanks and more bullets. And please take American dollars, put it into your economy, which will then reverberate into your army, which will then stomp on Ukrainian skulls. Please do it. I don't think most Americans want that, because they think that's immoral and they want to support the other person who's defending a young democracy. I believe it's a moral struggle. You disagree with me on that. What I'm asking you is to ask you something which was clearly a moral struggle, which was a struggle against apartheid. Do you think the United States should have sanctioned apartheid South Africa if apartheid South Africa, sanctioning them, would cause an increase in inflation?
Dylan, it's a retarded question.
Answer the question. Don't dodge it like a bitch. I'm sorry. Stop being a bitch. You got to answer the question. Come on. This is a simple question. Everybody understands what I'm trying to ask you. Alec, do you understand what I'm asking him?
It's a really stupid, loaded question that I can only answer one way.
Wait 1 second. Let me ask you. Alec.
Like, you're okay with it.
Alec.
Hold on.
Alec, I need to ask you. Would you sanction apartheid South Africa?
No, would I sanction it?
Sure.
Yes. Would you sanction it? Yes or no?
Chat, what's the right answer?
Wow.
Look at that. Nobody can answer it. It seems like we haven't settled the issue of apartheid 30 years later.
We're all against apartheid here. The reason that I think
I would sanction it, yes.
Okay, look at that. He answered it. Now you answer it.
Listen. I'm operating on like 50% brain capacity. I apologize. I guess I want to let non-smoker, like, if you could answer the question and then you can explain why you think that like these two aren't related. I think that's fair, right?
Okay, so I would support sanctioning apartheid South Africa to end apartheid rule and make the country more equitable for blacks, of course. Right. And if that increased inflation in the short term, maybe even into, the midterm, like into like a year or so. I think I would have more sympathy for that than I would the Ukraine struggle. So I would have to answer yes. The reason that I'm resisting answering is because they're not comparable examples whatsoever. And this is the issue that I have with you, Dylan, in a broad sense, is that a lot of times when I listen to your content, you reduce everything down to these like totally unrelated examples. And you say, oh, you see, it proves that I'm right about this one conflict. When it's like, that would be like me saying like, okay, well, would you support, supporting Nazi Germany under these conditions? And you'd be like, well, no, I'm against Nazi Germany. I'd be like, gotcha. That's not the own you think it is. It's like, I don't support apartheid. And honestly, look, do I have some sympathies for the Russian position? Yeah, but I'm not like a major Putin simp either. I feel like there's corruption in Russia. I feel like the war in general is a bad thing. I want to see the conflict end as soon as possible. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, you're kind of picking the most radical examples as comparisons. When
we're in a radical situation.
Yeah, but okay, what I mean is radically different. In terms of this one, there is an apartheid in Ukraine or Russia.
That's all I meant to. Okay, so I don't know what it is with Twitch and conversations on the internet, but hypotheticals or like just comparisons, people don't understand. Just because I'm comparing something doesn't mean I'm necessarily saying these situations are comparable. Let me be clear. Apartheid and what's happening in Ukraine is not the same thing, obviously. Yeah. All I meant to establish is that you would be willing to put the American people through economic woes in order to stand up for something morally internationally. because that's something I wanted to establish with you. Because if you disagree under any circumstances with like putting America through economic woes because you wanted to make a moral stance, then like we're just never going to agree, and there's no reason to even continue the conversation, right?
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. And okay, like the same thing I would say about World War II. Would I support U.S. entry into World War II despite the fact that it had a negative impact at home? Of course, right? But that doesn't mean that I support the intervention in Ukraine. I think the circumstances.
Okay, so that means the real discussion that needs to be had isn't even necessarily about the economics of how this is going to affect the United States. The real discussion that needs to be had is whether the Ukrainian struggle is moral. And we can talk about that if you'd want.
No, I would say that the real discussion is our support of it moral?
Okay.
Right? Because our support of it is not moral whatsoever.
It's 100% moral. We haven't gone hard enough. Long range ATACs, man.
You want to annihilate huge portions of the population. That's why it's not enough for you.
Is that what I said?
Yeah, you said you wanted to kill all the people in major regions in the east of Ukraine, unless I misunderstood you. Didn't you say you wanted to wipe them off the face of the earth?
Did you call me retarded earlier, or my question retarded?
Huh?
I'm sorry. Okay. So what I said was I wanted to wipe a country off the face of the earth. A country is a state. That's a nation state, not necessarily a people, right? If I said, yes.
It sounds like Hitler.
I did want to
what the fuck? Wait, what did you just said that sounds like Hitler? Okay. Let me ask you a question. Do you think if I said Rhodesia should be wiped off the face of the earth, would you say, do you want to kill all white people in Rhodesia? No, that's ridiculous.
You want to kill everyone there.
It sounds like no.
I think I wanted to clarify earlier, and I should have asked this earlier. Dylan, what can you just to clarify what exactly you mean by wipe the country off the face of the earth? Because I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of like
what I meant was I do not think the LPR, the DPR, just like Rhodesia, they're nation states that have no right to exist. They're colonial projects propped up by others. Rhodesia was propped up by the South African government. The LPR, the DPR, 90% of their officials have been Russian governments, Russian officials, or they have been FSB agents or Russian citizens. Very few of them have actually been Ukrainians. Igor Girkin, very famously, the defense minister of the DPR, war criminal, by the way. He was an FSB agent. It's been run by FSB agents. It's basically directly run by Moscow because it's an occupational force. It's an extension of the Russian government, as we see coming about through the annexation of these territories. So I don't believe these have a right to exist because they're really just nothing more than an occupational force of what is Ukrainian territory that is being used to brutalize the Ukrainian population and suppress democracy as they replaced all the democratically elected leaders with Russian appointees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you need to write an essay to explain what you
I'm
really
sorry that nuance is difficult for you. It's difficult for most tankies.
Bullshit is difficult for me. It's difficult for regular people too.
What was that?
When you're bullshit.
Bullshit's difficult for you.
Yeah. Big, long, fucking like.
I hear like.
Nonsense explanations about why it's okay for you to say you can you want a country wiped off the face of the earth, and then you're going to turn around and use all these reductio ad Hitlerum fucking.
Are you done like virtue signaling about how I'm a genocidal maniac and we can like move on?
No, I'm not quite done. In fact, I'll go on. You're full of shit, and you're only over there to promote your fucking channel.
Oh wow, look at that! Couldn't win the debate earlier. Bringing it back up because you can't deal with the fact that I used nice words towards the occupation. I was mean towards the Russian occupiers. Oh my god, I can't believe it.
You fucking writhe like the fucking disgusting demon you are.
The demon, my god.
Yeah, you're a fucking creature, bro.
A creature. What, are you dehumanizing me because I'm gay? Wow, that is disgusting. How dare you be homophobic towards me because I'm gay? Calling me a creature. Dehumanization is evil. Why? You Nazi scum, you fascist. Why do you love Hitler? We can do this all day where we can just... You called me a creature. Why are you dehumanizing me? Why would you do that? You know Hitler dehumanized people? You see how we devolve this conversation into nothing? We can devolve this conversation to be absolutely worthless if we want to. Let's start a new page and let's be a little bit more good faith. Okay? Maybe slightly? Okay. Fantastic.
So what other atrocities do you want to compare this to like corner me into agreeing with you? While we're on, like,
I'm not cornering you.
Great start on the good faith.
I'm not cornering you into. I'm not trying to corner you. I'm trying to see if you're consistent, and I'm trying to see. Really, the South Africa question was to ask if you would be willing, because I wanted to know if you're just a hardcore American nationalist and you're like, fuck the rest of the world. I'm American, right?
I'm anti-intervention in general. I grew up in the Iraq War generation, the Afghanistan War generation. I watched, lots of people who grew up in my town go off to that war, many of whom died. And many of the people, the Americans who went over to the Middle East, committed fucking war crimes. And now we're sitting here saying, like, no, guys, we just have to support Ukraine because actually, the other side's really bad and they're uniquely evil and we got to be the world's police force. And it's the same arguments that the Bush administration used about Iraq. It's
literally not the same arguments.
It's exactly the same.
Okay, so what weapons of mass destruction? Actually, the Russian government made the weapons of mass destruction argument about Ukraine. They said that Ukraine had bioweapons that targets Russian DNA. I mean, like,
I'm talking about the moral framing of these.
So yes, so taking out all of the lies of the Bush administration is kind of, for example, you were killing me for the comparison earlier, right? This is not a comparison that I would be happy for because I don't think it's comparable.
Okay, it's not. Listen, that's fair. Okay, they're not exactly the same, so I won't play that card. But the point I'm trying to make broadly is that I'm against interventionism in a general sense. Now, are there extreme examples where it's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense to sanction that country? Yeah, I mean, I'm for that, right? That makes sense. It's reasonable. It's very different than what we're doing in Ukraine, and the situation in Ukraine, in my view, is not one that's going to be helped by us sanctioning Russia and then sending billions of fucking, well, I actually have no issue even with sending aid in terms of like, medical aid and all that stuff to the people of Ukraine. I really have no problem with that. But what I have an issue with is like billions of dollars being given, to weapons contractors to make all of these fucking guns and tanks and missiles and bombs and send those over to Ukraine to just kill Russians. And that's somehow good. Like, I don't really, the calculus doesn't add up.
Okay, well, I feel like there was like a lot of, when you boil it down to, we gave money to company to kill Russians, I feel like that leaves out like a lot of context, right? Yes, but I could also say that we gave money to companies to kill Germans, and then we're at the same position because we didn't include.
Now you're doing it again,
no,
bro.
I'm not doing it because what you did, now you're doing it. I'm telling you that's reductionist to boil it down to those core elements because you can do that with any war. You can do that with any war. You can do that with any war. Okay. Then I could just say it about a different war. I can say it about a different war. If you want me to do it about a different war, I could say that oh my gosh, these international socialists, they gave money to like some African rebels to kill white people. Like, that's terrible. And what I'm talking about is Rhodesia. That would be a terrible because I've reduced it and I removed some key elements that would change how people perceive the situation, because those key elements are important. For example, when you talk about giving money to military companies, I believe profiting off of death with like selling of weapons and weapons of war, I think that's inherently immoral. And I think as human beings, that's something we need to overcome. We need to find a way to do that, whether that's with the nationalization of weapons manufacturers, something else. I don't know. I don't have the solution to that. But that's nothing new. That has been an element of warfare since the beginning of warfare, as ever since people figured out how to sharpen a rock, people have been selling sharpened rocks. That was true in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, every war that's ever happened. And so that element is nothing special. And so when you analyze that from a moral stance, I just don't understand. That just feels like how does that affect this war in difference to, say, all the wars that were moral, which you admit there were some, like, which people also made money off of.
And that's World War II, in my view.
So would you
say World War II is an incredibly hypocritical argument for Americans to make, because we didn't even get involved in the war until we were attacked. We didn't give a fuck. In fact,
we did get involved.
Many Americans
did get involved. We sent aid to the Soviet Union. We sent it to the UK. We sanctioned Japan. We got involved.
American companies supported Nazi Germany and Hitler too.
Okay,
I have to jump in here.
But an American company and the American government are two separate entities. There are American companies that are still operating within Russia.
Right. But what I'm trying to get across to you is that the idea that America's involvement in the war is purely this moral thing to stop Nazism, when there are American companies not being prevented from doing so, by the way, from the American government, funding Hitler's rise to power, funding the Nazi party, right, doing business in Nazi Germany. Okay, we do nothing to stop that, or at least not enough. And yeah, we did send aid to England and France and the Soviet Union. You're correct in that, but we didn't get involved in the war until we were attacked. So this idea that we're the
Wait,
moral
let me ask you a question. You would say sending aid is getting involved. We didn't join the war until like if you were fist fighting someone else and I gave you a knife, I got involved, right?
God, bro.
Like, but because people downplay American involvement up to that point, we were an ally in anything but name up to that point, and people forget that the reason the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor wasn't because we were just sitting there and they killed us. They attacked us because we just loved freedom too much, like many people like to pretend. They attacked us because we were sanctioning them, because we were like, hey, yo, you're going a little crazy time. You're kind of Fortnite dancing over all of Asia right now. You need to stop that.
It actually was my understanding up to this point that we didn't get involved until they bombed Japan. Are you saying that's incorrect, Dylan?
That is incorrect, yes.
Okay.
It is correct. Dylan's just coming up with some weird.
Wait, okay. So do you think we're involved in the war in Ukraine? Do you think we're involved in the war in Ukraine?
Okay, I would say that our level of involvement in Ukraine is not at all the same as our level of involvement in World War II.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that are we involved?
No, I wouldn't say we're involved. We're not directly involved. We don't have troops over there.
Well, okay. Well, then we don't. What are we talking about? Well, okay. You're saying directly involved. I'm asking if we're involved. Okay. I'm not asking we have military boots. I'm just asking for the word involved. Right? We're involved. Right? Come on. This is we're sending. We're part of the reason why they're winning.
Yeah, I get what you're trying to do. It's another fucking,
This isn't. I'm not doing anything. This is. I'm just asking you to acknowledge that we're involved in Ukraine.
Okay. America is involved in Ukraine in terms of providing aid to the Ukrainians. Yeah. Yes.
Same way. That's the same way we were involved in World War II up until we were bombed.
Okay. See, what I'm trying to get across is an argument regarding America's involvement with World War II, because you keep bringing it up as this example of like, oh, well, there was this genocide and Nazis, and I'm trying to, I never said that. I shouldn't have. Okay, whatever. I'm strawmanning you. Fine. I'll just call it strawman then. But what I'm trying to get across to you is this idea that America's involvement in Nazi Germany is not, World War II and, declaring war on Nazi Germany is not this like great good effort to save Europe, save the Jews, save the Roma people, save homosexuals, save disabled people, save the world, et cetera, et cetera. And it came down to us being attacked. That's really what it was all about. And, yes, we wanted to come in a sense to aid our allies, and so that's why we were funding, sending weapons and aid and stuff over to England and France and the Soviet Union. But I don't think that I always buy this line of reasoning that like America jumped in and saved the day when it was like the Soviet Union that toppled Nazi Germany. We mostly did a bulk of our fighting in the Pacific, and we didn't get involved we did our part in liberating France, but a bulk of our fighting took place in the Pacific, and it was clearly in retaliation for being attacked by the Japanese. So I'm not buying this whole America always does the right thing at the end of the day. Ultimately, I think it was for the greater good that we got involved. But I don't think that that's the same situation in Ukraine whatsoever.
I would say when it comes to World War II and our involvement, I think like all wars, there's a multitude of factors as we get involved in wars. I think we have a tendency to try to like find simple answers to complicated questions because it makes like a good like soundbite, or like it makes a good like it's easy to explain to people, and it's because it's easy if you're a person and you're just told this is the reason why, nothing else, and it's easy for you to have that, and then you got the answer. I think we got involved for World War II for a ton of reasons. I think a lot of them were economic. I think a lot of them were geostrategic and military. And I think some of them were, in fact, moral. I think it would have been a lot more difficult to rationalize the amount of support we were giving to allied nations up until we joined the war to the American public, considering that we were in the throes of a fucking depression, if it wasn't for the fact that the Germans were fighting a war of aggression against Poland, a war of aggression against France, who was our ally during the First World War, and Americans hold sympathy towards the French due to their support during the American Revolution, and us fighting hand in hand with them, with the devil dogs and everyone else during the First World War. And I think that's the same reason that Americans feel very sympathetic towards the Ukrainians, is not because I as an American really want to make sure that that we have another NATO expanded state, and you ask an American, that's not what they're going to tell you. They're going to be like, the fucking Russians are killing everybody. It's fucking disgusting. And that's why I think we should support Ukraine. That's what the average American's going to tell you. And I think that also gives the American government more wiggle room and allows them to be able to send the aid that they are, is because it's popular, because it's also moral to give the person getting invaded by another force who wants to take their territory and occupy them. It's moral to give the person defending themselves a gun. It's moral to give them the means to defend themselves, especially if they're liberating territory and uncovering mass graves left and right left by the occupier, which barely considers them human.
Right. Yeah, look, I think what it comes down to, and maybe you disagree with me, is this idea that ultimately this doesn't feel like a war that America is supporting for the greater good or morals. In my opinion, America is supporting this war because we need to maintain, a sense of legitimacy in the world, right? Where we've drawn clear boundaries with Russia. You can't do X, you can't do Y, you can't do Z. And we've done the same with China. And as they continue to, one of the reasons, if we're talking objectively, that this war is such an historic event is because Russia legit just said, go fuck yourself, I'm not going to listen, and just sent troops in. And that, to me, is super significant because this is the first real breakdown of U.S. hegemony since the end of the Cold War. And I think, in some sense, that actually serves a greater good. I think that our maintenance of empire, this ultra bloated, ultra expensive thing that really doesn't benefit the American people other than giving cheaper consumer goods, it by and large, it's this disgusting, really like kind of evil thing that should be torn apart. And I would prefer it torn apart non-violently. So in conflicts like this, where Russia is basically just looking at boundaries we've drawn, ignoring them, I think it actually, in my view, it'd be beneficial for America in the long run to just not fund the conflict at all, send aid where it's necessary, basically back off. And I feel like any other, copium of like, oh, well, it's for the greater good, defending democracy and all this stuff. It's kind of like, as I said, it's just cope. We're going to be sending all these weapons over there. We're going to station troops. We're going to, do this kind of show of force stuff.
Don't get me too hard.
This is a losing effort, in my opinion. It's a losing effort.
So first, on the moral side, like for World War II, I think people like easy answers to complicated questions. And I think, because people like easy answers to complicated questions, it's very easy to say America's doing this 100% because they just want to fuck over Russia and they just want to destroy this birth of the multipolar world order. But if you ask the average American, that's not what they're going to tell you. That's not what they care about. And it is the American public support for the war during these economic hard times after COVID and with the inflation issues and everything else we're doing that allows the American government to basically have carte blanche to give Ukraine everything it needs to win. It is that the American people which have made the moral calculation that this is a struggle they want to support, right? And so I do think that we're kind of simplifying that a little bit. And if this, as you are saying, is the birth of the multipolar world order because Russia said, fuck you, I have to say, this is the worst possible advertisement anyone could have possibly put together for the multipolar world order, as mass graves are uncovered en masse, women are raped, civilians bombed, hospital bombed by a nation just flagrantly trying to annex large swaths of territory illegally. I would say it's fucked. And honestly, it makes the unipolar world order honestly look better by saying that this is an advertisement of the multipolar world order, which isn't even something that I'm not hyped about unipolar world order. I want a different system built.
It's one or the other.
I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other. Or if the poles need to be placed in different places, I don't think they should be placed in Russia and China. I think they should be placed in international institutions.
Well, we will be one of those poles just based on the size of our economy and our military and our influence in the world.
And I'll also say Russia kind of sucks, and I don't mean that as like the Russian people suck or like the spirit of the Russian people. Russian people are perfectly fine. I know a lot of Russian people. Some of my best friends are Russian, but I would say that actually that's not true. None of my best friends are Russian. But
I have Russian friends. I can't be anti-Russian.
I can't be Russophobic.
Yeah, you're sounding like that whole like the racist guy who's like, oh, but I have black friends. Like
that was the joke. Yes.
I know that you're not trying to. I get where you're trying to, but like maybe rephrase that.
That was the joke that I wanted to sound like that. But
I don't know. My chat wasn't happy about it.
I know. But this is the worst advertisement we could possibly have for a multipolar world order. If the birth of it is literally just the ripping of a nation's sovereignty away and the smashing about of a democracy as all these war crimes are committed flagrantly by a nation state which has no respect to what the local indigenous population of Ukraine wants. Whether it was what they did to the Tatars for the last 8 years or what they're doing in Crimea now. As for the boundaries we drew, this was the boundaries the Ukrainian people drew after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when every single oblast in Ukraine voted to be independent, including Crimea, all of the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson. That was the boundaries the Ukrainian people drew. We didn't draw the boundaries. The Ukrainians drew the boundaries that the Russians are now trampling upon. The boundaries the Russians agreed to, by the way. So
are you aware that in 91, the Ukrainians voted for sovereignty, but also to remain part of the Soviet Union, or whatever the Soviet Union would become?
Okay.
71%.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm suggesting to you is that the people in Eastern Ukraine, the circumstances in the early 90s versus now are very different. And obviously that whole conflict arose in 2014 with Maidan. So I think that their feelings on that probably aren't exactly the same as they would have been in the early 90s when the original borders were determined.
Yeah, I think they're more aggressively anti-Russian now.
Yeah. You think the people in Eastern Ukraine
Yes,
are more
absolutely. Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. Wow. I think from the conversations that I've had, now of course I'm me and you're not going to take my word out for it, but most people seem to feel either backstabbed in some capacity, or because there's two groups. There's Eastern European, most Eastern Ukrainians I've talked to always were not supportive of like any annexation. They might have had friendly feelings towards Russia, but they never wanted to be annexed necessarily. There's not really any polling to indicate that Eastern Ukrainians wanted to necessarily be annexed by Russia in the recent history, but they had friendly feelings towards them. Many of those people seem to somewhat feel backstabbed, because they kind of bought into this idea of like the brotherly nation state, the idea that Russia is the brotherly nation. They both like come from the same Slavic history, and that, we look out for the best interests of each other. And now they come to their home, which is smashed to smithereens by Russian bombs, torn apart by Russian artillery, and their family members killed by Russian bombardment. And so they see that it was the Russians who initiated this invasion and did this to them, and they feel betrayed. When I was in Eastern Ukraine, everybody that I met fighting against the Russian army spoke Russian. Every single one. I couldn't hear them speaking Ukrainian. And hearing so much dialogue before coming to this country about, the Russian-speaking populations, these people speak Russian, they want to be part of Russia. And then I meet the Russian speakers, and they're the ones firing at the Russians, shooting at the Russians. Just because, somebody speaks Russian, or might have some Russian family members, or might have family members even within Russia, doesn't necessarily mean they want to be annexed by a neighboring nation. I think there's a lot of people in Mexico who speak English probably in the border regions because they're American immigrants over there, or there are a lot of people in Texas who speak Spanish. That doesn't mean that they want to be annexed by Mexico to bring back the historical borders of the Mexican whatever the fuck. So I think that they don't want to be annexed. Absolutely. That's why they did a sham referendum, because they couldn't have a real referendum, because if they had a real one.
Listen, I'm no Elon guy. I think Elon's, very like dishonest and full of shit and all that stuff, promotion. But what are your thoughts on that proposal that if there were like a UN supervised referendum in at least
that specific part? I mean, obviously it would depend on the specifics of the referendum, but I'm not inherently against that. The rest of it I thought was shit, but that's like the one part I think is somewhat salvageable, even though it'll never happen.
Yeah. So look, I really hate when arguments get to this thing of like, well, I don't believe it was real. No, I do. It was like, what do I know? I think the referendum is significant, right? It's not something you can just ignore. But okay, like I think it's actually reasonable to say if there's a UN supervised referendum and then the people in those regions vote to be part of Russia. I think that we should probably be doing everything in our power if we really agree to a peaceful resolution here to like try to figure out how to make that happen. Obviously, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that if there was I think that would be the best outcome. I don't think anybody is going to be pushing towards that outcome. I don't think the Russians want that outcome. I don't think the Ukrainians want that outcome. I don't think the Americans want that outcome. So I just don't think that's going to happen. It'd be cool. Sadly, I don't think that's in the cards. Speaking on this referendum in particular, nobody who is displaced from the territory, which is like a decent part of the population. We're talking like 50-60% of the population is displaced. None of them got to vote on it. So a bunch of people didn't get to vote whether their house was annexed by the Russian Empire. Then there's also the fact that if you're in Ukrainian-controlled territory in Donetsk or Kherson or in a lot of these areas, you don't get to vote either on whether your house just got annexed. Well, that's pretty fucked too. That doesn't really make much sense. Then there's the fact that the Russian government admitted after the vote that they didn't even know what borders they were going to draw for the region. So that means people voted on the borders of their community they didn't even know what the borders were going to be. How can you have a vote on independence if you don't even have any idea what the borders are going to be because you're constantly that doesn't make fucking sense. And it was also done in reaction to the Russians getting crushed in Kharkiv because the defensive line was so thin and they got pushed across the Oskil River. So they did it in a move of desperation, and that was shown because they canceled a referendum in Kherson a month before due to safety concerns because of the Kherson counteroffensive. And on top of everything else, there's like a lot of footage of like a lot of ballot stuffing that has been circulated online. I do just want to be clear, like the Russians have a trend of doing this type of thing in Ukraine. I don't think the Russians care about democracy in any sense of the word when we're talking about the government.
No. I look, again, you're over there. I'll take your word that you've spoken to people. I don't have any evidence to counter that you've spoken to people. I wasn't present at the referendum, so I can't say that they weren't true. So, I might just have to, hey, like, I guess find sources on that. Otherwise, it's not worth even going down that road with you. But I guess my argument to that, I could just leave it as it's worth getting an accurate measure because I don't think that it's at all like this, absolute resistance to being annexed by Russia either. I think it's probably, I wouldn't even know the percentages, but I would imagine there's a significant number of people who would like to be part of Russia and want to move away from Ukraine. They view it as some corrupt government since 2014, and they feel like they're in hostile hands. And, look, maybe there's a percentage of people over there who just want to be independent in general.
I would say there's probably similar support for Calexit.
Okay. Well, look, I'll take your word for it. But moving on from that, I'm willing to go as long as you want, but we do risk going in circles here.
Yeah.
I just think that, again, you were saying before about this is a terrible advertisement for the multipolar world order. There's two responses I have to that. One, this is kind of a bad, in my opinion, advertisement for the unipolar world order because it feels like something that's inevitably, objectively kind of falling apart. And we're basically just pouring money into it and proliferating death, war, and destruction for the sake of maintaining something that probably isn't good for us, the regular American people, or the people of the world. And then two, I would ask you, what about all of and you said before, I have to give you credit. You said before that you don't support the unipolar world order. Well, I do kind of want to mention all of the, and there are many war crimes carried out in the name of maintaining that unipolar world order. I mean, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just look at all the massacres in Iraq under American occupation, Abu Ghraib, you can go on and on and on. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people died really for no fucking reason. I don't know. I would say that there's
the thing is,
all right, yeah, no, just fucking go ahead.
Okay. So I would say that the first thing
Wait a
would
minute.
be,
So just another thing, because I wasn't done. So I just want to
okay.
mention to you that there are a number of indictments that you could make against the unipolar world order that are just as significant. And for you to ignore that is fucking disgusting.
Disgusting. Oh, scumfuck. I got it. Ooh. Okay.
Why didn't you tell that?
I would say that the first thing is, I mean, we didn't proliferate the violence. It was the Russians that they invaded. You can't condemn a state for somebody helping a state defend itself or a state defending itself against an invasion. I wouldn't look at the Chinese if they supported the Vietnamese during our invasion of Vietnam and say, "Wow, look at you helping these helpless people with AK-47s fighting in the jungle against the most powerful military on the planet. There's no chance in hell any of these people are going to win. In fact, you're honestly guilty for supporting the Vietnamese against the United States. Of course, that'd be ridiculous. The main culprit would be the Americans taking over from the French colonial occupation. That would be the main culprits in Vietnam. It wouldn't be the Chinese until, of course, they invaded after, or the Russians for supporting the Viet Cong as well. Well, the Soviet Union, but then, of course, includes modern day Russia. So I would say, first off, yeah, so I think that they're the main one, proliferating violence because they're the one who invaded. As for the unipolar world order, if somebody was to make the case for the multipolar world order with Russia and China as the other poles, for me, I would be like, okay, what's the case you're making to like how it's better than the unipolar world order or how it's better than the system we have currently? And the first ringing shot of it is Russia invading and murdering and raping and filling up mass graves. It's not the best advertisement. It isn't. And I agree with you. America's done a lot of evil things. I've already agreed to this. And so I brought them up. So you can't say it's disgusting that I didn't highlight them. I specifically went out of my way to highlight Western Sahara. When's the last time you heard somebody on Twitch mention Western Sahara, for fuck's sake, and the UN referendum there, right? Nobody has mentioned that since the 90s. I mean, we even sold them out for the Israelis. So yeah, I mean, I can both say that like the unipolar world order has problems, but a multipolar world order with Russia as one of these mighty poles doesn't seem to be a good option for the people around Russia, like the Latvians, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, and the Poles, who are all saying this is fucking terrifying. I mean, even the Belarusians, who are supposed to be in the Russian sphere of influence, don't seem to be very happy with this invasion, as they're engaging in acts of sabotage, and Lukashenko can't convince his population to invade the country, as they were almost openly revolting against him 2 years ago due to his sham election. So all I'm saying is like this is a bad advertisement from the multipolar world order.
Yeah. So a couple things on that. First of all, I would argue that the idea that I'm suggesting there should be a world governed by Russia and China is not really what I'm trying to say. What I'm suggesting is a better world system, in my view, would be one where there's a better or a more equitable balance of power between the major countries in the world in terms of economic size and military size. Really, I think every country that is has nuclear capabilities should have more or less like an equitable say in many of these conflicts. Because
what about Israel?
Yeah, I think. Listen, I'm not a fan of Israel at all, but I would say that if Israel is a nuclear power, they're a major military force. Now, a lot of that is because of direct U.S. support, and if you want to get into my views on Israel, that's a whole different other thing. But as the world stands right now, objectively, we look at it like, yeah, there are these I don't know, 8 to 12 or so countries that have these major, economic implications for the rest of the world. If anything happens there, it affects the rest of us. And these, huge, in many ways, bloated military industrial complexes, many of which include nuclear weapons. And any event, that occurs with one of these countries, it's not a positive or it's not a good thing if America is the arbiter of justice and comes swooping in to try to sort shit out. Because in every single example where we've attempted to do that, it's created more disruption and problems. Vietnam, you mentioned before, but Korea is another great example. I mean, we fucking totally ruined that peninsula. We killed, upwards of millions of people. And for what? For this divided country now, where half of it is, starving and the other half of it is, booming in terms of its economics, but there's this mass underclass of very poor people. And, it just all like, I think, generally speaking, what I'm just trying to get across is that maintaining empire, in some sense, it kind of was logical during the Cold War because it's this vying for power between these two major countries. I'm not saying it was right. It at least made sense. Now it doesn't really make sense. What we're trying to do is sort of contain Russia and China and all these, well, really Russia and China, from gaining any sort of spheres of influence out of these tight little regions. And I think, honestly, Dylan, at the end of the day, it's a losing battle.
Can I ask you a question? You keep saying like the unipolar world is showing its cracks, and obviously America is not the 90s anymore. But if anything, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has made me a lot less confident in Russia's abilities as a world power, and a lot more confident in NATO's strength, considering that NATO has basically been guideless. I would say sailless, directionless, I think is the word, directionless for the last ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like what's its purpose past the collapse of the Soviet Union, since it was a mutual defense pact to protect from the Soviet Union. And then the Russians invaded Ukraine and gave NATO purpose again, when many people were questioning whether it even needed to exist, and then added 2 more NATO states, Sweden and Finland. And if Ukraine wins, there's a decent chance it will be added as a NATO state. Personally, I would say this hasn't made me like, oh, the cracks in the unipolar world order, America and NATO look so weak. If anything, I mean, Russia probably is coming out of this looking 10 times weaker. And I think it's making a lot of authoritarian leaders around the globe kind of question exactly how much this unipolar world order has fallen. And a lot of people are questioning whether or not they can go through with similar actions in their part of the world. I also think that this should be part and parcel with America decreasing support to outright eliminating support for Saudi Arabia, for limiting support for Azerbaijan. We need to have a long and hard discussion about Erdogan's government. I feel like I gotta make this disclaimer at the end of each sentence because America do bad. But yeah, I don't see the collapse when it comes to this invasion. Because the Russians, I mean, their army kind of fucking sucks. I'm gonna be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't you think there's a difference between the amount of in terms of the full power of the Russian military, especially after they implement mobilization, versus what they've done early on?
Shoigu says that already 200,000 conscripts have already been deployed into Ukraine, and they're still retreating. They've more than doubled the amount of troops they have in Ukraine, and they're still retreating.
Gotcha.
What's going on?
Hey man, I'm not fucking General Patton over here. What I'm saying is that it stands to reason to some extent that the Russian military, which is just by man much larger, and you would imagine in some sense better equipped. Maybe that's not the case now with all the Western support of Ukraine. But in a general sense, I would say, yeah, I mean, the Ukrainians are at the very least outmanned. Look, I'm a little apprehensive going down that road because I don't want to come across like I'm supporting Ukrainians being killed. I don't support that whatsoever, But all I'm saying is that when I talk about the proliferation of death, what I'm saying is that, yeah, Russia entering Ukraine, of course, an X number of people were going to die. But sending weapons over there to prolong the conflict will lead to more people dying. That's kind of my argument.
Do you think it was wrong for anyone to send the Viet Cong support?
Well, that's an interesting question. Again, I think it's a very different situation. And I don't, feel totally comfortable, making the A to A. It's apples and oranges. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I think it's good if the Soviet Union supported the Viet Cong.
Okay. I think there was another thing I wanted to address. What was it? What was the other thing? Oh yeah, the nukes. I am somebody who is generally in favor of denuclearization. I basically want most states to get rid of their nuclear arsenals. I think they're a ticking time bomb, quite literally. They're a ticking time bomb that will go off eventually, not even necessarily due to humans like deliberately nuking each other, but like some old nuclear arsenal rusting out or somebody forgetting about something, and then boom, just fucking mass destruction. That's something that scares me quite a lot, right? And so I'm fearful of this thing you talked about. Basically, any country with a nuclear arsenal should basically kind of like become a pole. Wouldn't that just motivate a lot of weak countries, generally weak, like weak internationally speaking, not as people or anything, like a weak nation to basically be like, well, if I want to get strong, I'll just get a nuke because then I'll be strong.
But
I mean, that's what North Korea did, and that's terrible that they did that.
No, it's a good thing. It's a really good thing.
You think it's a good thing?
It's a wonderful thing. That's the only thing
they're doing missile launches over Japan right now.
I think okay, the missile launches in general, I think, are a routine part of maintaining a nuclear arsenal for a country that's still developing the technology.
Would it be routine for us to do a missile launch over Russia?
We tested nuclear warheads all the time when we first developed them.
Did we launch missiles over Russia?
We didn't geopolitically, we weren't in physically, geographically a place where we had to do that to test their capabilities. No, North Korea is. You know
they did that knowing it would be extremely provocative and scary for Ukrainian as Japanese civilians, as sirens go off, as they think maybe this will be the last time they get to speak to their families because a fucking missile is inbound. Like that's pretty scary.
I'm not saying that there isn't an aspect to that also includes, a show of force. Sure. But it's also part of testing the actual missiles themselves. Well, now, what I'm trying to get across to...
But they can fire them up. They can test them by firing them up. That's how they usually do it to avoid confrontations like this.
What I'm trying to say is that it's good for North Korea to have nuclear weapons simply because it's preventing the invasion of North Korea, which is objectively what was going to happen in the 1990s during the famine. In fact, there's documentation. I can pull the sources up. It's like a whole thing. But basically, the U.S. government saw that there was a famine going on in North Korea. We actually decided not to provide aid or do any sort of like meaningful work with the Kim regime because we hoped that the famine would weaken the Kim regime and lead to it being overthrown. And that's one of the reasons why the North Koreans went through the arduous march. It was this horrible time in Korean history. And Kim Jong-il devoted so much of the country's resources to continue developing nuclear weapons. He was actually willing to drop that in the event that the U.S. would send aid and cut the sanctions, and we didn't. We didn't because we thought their regime would collapse on its own.
Do you legitimately think that the Kim regime would have dropped their pursuance of nuclear weapons if we reduced sanctions or stopped sanctions?
That's what they agreed to do.
That's what they agreed. Do you think they've ever lied about their nuclear arsenal before?
I think that you have just as much evidence for that as someone saying some random.
Well, I mean, so what do you mean I just have as much evidence that they lied about the nuclear arsenal? Like we can just look at what they've said about the nuclear arsenal and then what is objective fact that they have a nuclear arsenal.
They've been pretty upfront that they've been developing it. It's not a matter of developing it and hiding. They've been actually, as you mentioned before, very open about the fact that they've developed it as a show of force. And it's not a show of force just for the sake of having a show of force. It's a show of force to show that they're not going to be pressured into making regime change.
Do you think that if it wasn't for nuclear weapons that they would have been invaded?
Yeah.
You don't think China would have stepped in with their nuclear arsenal and stopped that, as happens with many nuclear... I mean, the Soviet Union did this many times, that they had a nuclear arsenal.
In the 90s, I'm less confident in saying that China would have jumped in to defend North Korea.
Was there any invasion plans drawn? I honestly don't know. But how far along was American invasion plans?
Well, we didn't attempt to invade simply because we hoped the Kim regime would collapse on its own. Okay. What I'm trying to argue to you is, let's say Kim never developed the weapons at all, and once we had a rapprochement with China in the 70s and then into the 80s and the 90s, when that economic relationship became further developed, and our relationship with China was really good, it's not infeasible to suggest that, now we can just triangulate around North Korea, depose Kim, and set up a puppet regime over there.
If we knew they were developing nukes, why didn't we just invade then? Because if they were developing nuclear weapons, then that would be the best time to invade, because once they have them, it's going to be a lot harder, right?
I think a big part of the reason we didn't was because a bulk of the nuclear research was taking place at a time when it would have been untenable to invade.
Okay. I have some vague memories about the Clinton administration in my mind right now, but it completely fails me. I haven't.
You mean you weren't there? You don't remember?
No, I wasn't born yet. Sadly,
Well,
I
that's
missed
kind of
that.
cringe.
Yeah, I was in my father's nutsack. Sadly, didn't have a front
Damn,
row
I was
seat
like
to that.
already 3 years old. Anyway, oh no, actually, wait, no, I was only one. Never mind.
Don't ask me how old I was.
Okay, I won't ask you. I won't. God, there was something else I wanted to ask you, but I already forgot what it was.
That's my fault. Sorry.
Fuck, what was it?
We were talking about whether or not
It
the
was,
U.S. would have invaded and
yeah,
North.
but there was something else. Oh, fuck, I already forgot it, so it's gone to time.
That's all right. I mean, we're a little off topic. I mean, not extremely off topic because again, it's just lending to the idea. You were saying that it's not good if more countries develop nuclear weapons. And, I think in a general sense, long term, yeah, I totally support nuclear, denuclearization for all, right? But currently, there are many countries with nuclear weapons and a few countries that are trying to develop them. Okay, so we're in a situation where objectively, I'm trying to suggest to you, all those countries should probably have a seat at this, so to speak, multipolar table, right? Because they all have the capability to do a lot of fucking damage.
I think there could be like a conference for nuclear states to discuss issues about nuclear, but I don't think that having a nuclear bomb should necessarily come with like special voting power in the UN and like I have a bomb, therefore fuck your human rights legislation, because that would be absolutely terrible way to run things. It's just I have bigger bomb, therefore human rights can suck a dick. Like I think that's a terrible way to run things.
There is a lot of problems with the UN in general, right?
The human rights count. I don't think that we should have these permanent seats at the top of it to begin with. I think that is inherently anti-democratic.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it should be a rotating sort of thing. But
yeah. Oh, but here's the other question. I remembered it. Do you think Ukraine should have given up their arsenal?
Their nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting question, and I understand why you're asking it. I would say, generally speaking, in that case, it was probably the right thing for Ukraine to do, assuming that Ukraine and Russia would have good relations moving forward. Obviously, in retrospect, it appears to be a big mistake. Ultimately, that would have prevented the SMO.
Didn't Russia say they would respect Ukraine's international borders and the agreement that they made to get rid of their nuclear arsenal? But then immediately when Ukraine's like, you know what? We're not going to go the path of being extremely favorable towards Russia. They're like, never mind.
Yeah. Who was the leader of Russia when that happened?
Vladimir Putin, 2014? What do you mean?
With the agreement to denuclearize?
Oh, no, I thought you were talking 2014 when they invaded. I think it was either Gorbachev or Yeltsin. Yeltsin.
So what I'm trying to say is that this administration and that one, two very different things.
Yeah, I also agree that. Well, no, I don't know if you agree with it, but I think Putin's a terrible, terrible, terrible human being.
I think we make Putin out. I wouldn't say Putin's some great guy at all. Okay, but I think the U.S. media is extremely guilty of making Putin seem like a uniquely evil person, when relative to the rest of the world, I would say he's about as evil as any other leader.
I would not agree with that. I would say he's on the more evil spectrum of world leaders. I think most nations haven't had their military create fucking mass graves in another country and invade. Actually, most world leaders haven't invaded another country.
The U.S.
Yeah, but the U.S. is an exceptional case, isn't it?
Well,
you said on the spectrum of the world, he's like in the middle, and I'm thinking most leaders have not ordered the invasion of another nation. That's the first thing. Most to that extent. Yeah, most leaders haven't engaged in a war of aggression. Most leaders haven't engaged in the annexation of another nation's territory illegally like this. Most leaders haven't engaged in it's hard to know exactly where the order came from, but we do know that there was orders for the executions of civilians. Who gave those orders, how high those orders went up, we don't know. But at the end of the day, he is the president of the Russian Federation. He is the one that would be held accountable in this type of situation. That was the precedent we sent after Nuremberg. So I mean, I would say he's pretty evil. Yeah, I mean, denying Ukraine's right to exist, denying a nation who wants to exist their right to exist when they very clearly have for hundreds of years struggled for their right to exist is pretty evil. It's the same thing Erdogan's doing to the Kurdish people. I think that's evil as well.
Yeah, so I guess maybe I could clarify. Equal to a country of comparable size, in terms of military strength, military size,
So you would say Joe Biden and Putin are on the same level.
Oh yeah, Joe Biden's a monster.
You're on the same level? I wouldn't say they're on the same level. I wouldn't go that
Would
far.
you agree he's a monster?
What do you use a monster? I guess relative to what is the question? Yeah, relative to what? Relative to U.S. leaders, no. Relative to the average person, yes. But that would be true of any major state.
Thank you. That's just my point.
Okay. I thought but you said of the world countries,
Right. So, what I'm trying to kind of get the idea across is that world leaders in general, relative to the average person, are monsters. Many world leaders, most world leaders in America. I mean, how many people? What do you think?
Yeah,
George W.
I mean,
what do you think?
I guess the difference is, right, when Joe Biden, right, he is president of the United States. The one thing he's done while in office that I think probably actually realigned a lot of my opinions on him was he's drawn down the American drone war to levels that we've never seen it drawn down to. Would you agree to that or not?
I agree with that.
If I said, if I said there was a 95 decrease percent in drone strikes in a president's term, you would assume it was fucking like the Green Party won the White House if you heard that in most circumstances.
I'm familiar with the reduction in drone strikes, Dylan.
Yeah.
Do you think
he pulled out of Afghanistan, which was?
Do you think that's pulling out of? Well, okay.
Wait, do you think? Let me ask you a question. Do you think Pete Buttigieg would have pulled out of Afghanistan?
You're saying a lot of shit, dude. Like, the pulling out of Afghanistan was a good thing in general, right? We needed to leave there. The way we exited was a fucking disaster. Everybody knows that.
Of course.
And then the drone thing is a stupid argument because he's done more to create war by funding, Ukraine and sending weapons over there.
He didn't create the war. Russia created the war when they invaded. You responded to the war. As a leader, you have to respond to wars of aggression. Churchill didn't create World War II because
kids were fighting on the playground. You gave one a gun and the other one a knife. Wouldn't that be like?
Okay, so FDR, World War II. We're back to this shit again. Yeah, but the thing is, FDR didn't create the war. Just like South Korea didn't create the war during the Korean Wars. It was the Kim family who invaded the South, right? They created the war. However, if you initiate a war, you created it. If you initiate a war, you created it. If I stabbed you, I initiated a fight. If I punched you, I created the fight.
Why are you attacking me? What did I do?
You know what I mean, though. If I punched you, I created the fight. If you defend yourself.
Korea was created by the U.S. We drew you understand the U.S. military establishment legit took a map from National Geographic, decided the borderline.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, the whole reason that conflict happened is because of the U.S.
Well, and Stalin and the Kim family. I mean, let me ask you a question. What claim to power did Kim realistically have when he really did bad shit?
Popular sovereignty.
Popular sovereignty. How popular was he that he had to be propped up by the Soviets?
We intervened before we gave the country a chance to decide on their own.
You mean, so you're saying, you mean like with the elections, or do you mean with the invasion?
No, when we legit drew up a boundary line, and you mentioned Stalin's fault and all of that is agreeing to it, which even the U.S. military was shocked that he did that. But U.S. military basically, was Bone Steel and all these people drew up this borderline, totally arbitrary, divided the country, and the South attacked initially. The North responded and invaded, and then the war happened. But we never gave the Korean people.
What do you mean the South attacked initially? What do you mean by that? So the South invaded? No,
the South attacked first.
How did they? Okay, who gives a fuck? I couldn't care less. The Poles shelled the Germans, right? The Poles shelled the Germans when the Germans invaded. Every war, it's like that, yeah.
Nobody's saying that. It's not always about World War II. Now, come on.
No, because the Russians said that the fucking Ukrainians attack them, the Germans said the Poles attack them, this is every war they say that they attacked first, and then they go in and they invade and start conquering.
I can find your source.
Okay. I think we're kind of getting off topic a little bit here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, maybe let's wrap up in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Run back to the actual Ukraine-Russian thing. Since that we came into this, with the discussion being about should the U.S. be funding Ukraine in this conflict, I think that'd be a good point to close on. Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Non-smoker, do you have a preference on who goes first in this?
No, it doesn't matter. I could go first.
Okay, sure.
I mean, I'm not convinced, at the end of the day. And okay, I think it's important for me to say that most Americans or most people, I think, who support Ukraine in this conflict, are generally well-intended, usually liberal-minded people. Okay, so I don't think that the people who support Ukraine or, whatever, like even people who maybe have a negative view of Putin or whatever, are bad people and horrible. And I'm definitely not anti-Ukraine. I don't want Ukraine to be destroyed and all this shit. Like, I would not ever advocate for anything like that. Ultimately, I want the war to end. I would like there to be peace. I do not think that can be achieved by us sending billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine. It's totally counterintuitive. I mean, Dylan keeps bringing up the example of two people getting into a fight. If you keep throwing weapons in the middle of a fight, it's not going to reduce the probability that the fight will continue. It's reducing the probability that the fight will be worse, right? That's my whole argument. And it's having a disastrous impact on the domestic economy. It's not going to get any better. Here's the one thing I'll grant Dylan. We're headed for a recession one way or another. And when I talk about civil unrest, it would not be simply because of Ukraine. What I'm saying, though, is that the situation in Ukraine is exacerbating this problem, and that the civil unrest, therefore, will be to a greater degree unavoidable, right, by our supporting this conflict continually, which I think is sad to say, and maybe for Dylan and a lot of people who support Ukraine, I think is a losing effort.
So I think sometimes you need to end a fight by winning it. And I think that's the best way to end the fight. Not only because by winning it, do you preserve certain things, whether it be Ukraine's democracy, Ukraine's territorial integrity, you stop your people from being occupied and brutalized as the Russian government has done in Bucha, in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, in Izium, in Lyman, and all these locations that have dropped into the international atmosphere of attention due to the scale of Russian violence. The most recent report of that was really horrifying to me was of this little portable Auschwitz that this one group of Russian soldiers made, where they took a gas mask, put it on people they were torturing, and then lit a cloth on fire and choked them to death as a form of torture. Like, the type of brutality we've seen is absolutely atrocious. And I think that this is a fight that you end by winning. Bullies, a lot of times, if we're going to be using playground fight analogies, a lot of times you can try to appease them all you want, but at some point you need to put a red line in the sand. And I think the Russians have crossed that red line, and that the correct outcome here is for them to leave Ukraine. When we say this is a losing effort, while we're saying this at the same time that the Russians just got routed in Kharkiv, the supposedly second most powerful army in the world. At the same time, they just got pushed out of Lyman. At the same time that the front line is collapsing around Kherson as more and more Russian soldiers surrender, and Russia has to take more and more brutal measures that even the Ukrainians don't have to take to defend themselves. The most obvious example of this is the 10 years in prison you can get for surrendering to Ukraine. These are ridiculous policies implemented by a desperate administration that is clawing at straws to see how they can save their colonial project, because the colonized don't want to be colonized, and they're not subjecting themselves to this anymore. And I think that this is a moral struggle. And people can say, oh, well, by us giving them guns, the Ukrainian, this keeps the war going because the Ukrainians will use these weapons. They will use these weapons. They will use these weapons to win the war. Therefore, before ending the war. And ultimately, the population that should that can have the moral like declaration on whether their deaths are worth the struggle are the Ukrainians. And if we were to look at any polling number from the Ukrainian population, the vast majority do not want to give up their territory. The vast majority do not want to surrender with the Russians. The vast majority barely even want to negotiate, considering the different things that Russia has done to them, not only over the past over 200 days, but the past 8 years, as they lied about putting their troops near Crimea, invaded Crimea, then illegally annexed it, lied about it the whole time, did a fake referendum, supported separatists and FSB agents as they went into Donetsk and shot down civilian airliners and brutalized the local population, persecuting religious minorities. Or we could just look at this bigger invasion, which they lied and talked about this was a training exercise on the border before invading. This is a pattern of behavior by the Russian government that needs to be stopped now, not 20 years down the road, with a settlement that will ultimately be broken if Ukraine isn't in a position of strength to defend itself moving forward. I think the Ukrainians should end the war by winning it.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate you guys both being here. First of all, I want to thank Non-Smoker for being flexible and allowing Dylan to be on at all tonight. I want to thank Dylan for coming on such short notice. And I know that this kind of turned into like a debate between you two and then me just kind of moderating. I thought that it was, I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. I got a lot of high level important ideas in my brain right now. And I do want to inform myself more on this conflict. So I was very informative from both of you. Thank you so much, guys, for your perspectives. And I hope both of you have a really great night.
If you want more information, I got a few Raytheon packets I can give you that give you a lot of good info.
Okay. I'll consider that. Thank you, Dylan.
No worries.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay. You both have a good one.
You as well. Thanks, Dylan.
Well, look at that. We had a debate today. We had a debate on the internet. I had no clue who that person was. I was going to say it's generally polite, but I was accused of being Hitlerian a few times. But, it is what it is. I'm just used to that type of dialogue on the internet anyway. As long as somebody's not literally screaming at the top of their lungs, it feels like it was like a polite debate. That's how low our standards have gotten. How are you doing, site chat, Twitch chat? How you guys doing? How you guys feel about that? It just kept using. God, I think the thing that got me is we established immediately almost that, hey, so you are willing to sanction countries and send aid to a country even though you're a non-interventionist, even if the struggle is moral and it's for a moral reason. So we immediately got around that, but we would pivot back to it anytime I felt like we got to like a corner or we got somewhere where I feel like there has we need like a hard yes or no, like an answer here, Was that the progenitor of the morally corrupt, bankrupt man soundbite? No, that was actually BPF. Dylan's frame is unbreakable. Oh, shucks. Dylan Burns. Dylan, you got a knuckle dragger here that's named Third Testicles. Oh, fantastic. Shit tier debate. Wait 1 second. I can't see what it says. You said God tier debate. Awesome. It was a good one. I'm glad you have found the Church of Raytheon. Lockheed Martin are heretics, and Raytheon is the one true church we should worship at. A Raytheon office was literally across the near my school when I was growing up, my high school. It was literally across from my high school, and it pissed me off a ton as a young little Bernie bro. As a kid. Crazy how he would say stop comparing the conflict to other conflicts every time you compared it. Well, because he thought those conflicts were moral while this one wasn't. When all I wanted to establish with him was that him saying he's an anti-interventionist is not really true, because if I provide him a situation where he wants to intervene, like Apartheid South Africa, he's perfectly willing to intervene. And so the real question wasn't, should we or should we not support the morality of the Ukrainian struggle? Because of anti-interventionist leanings, because I don't feel like he's really an anti-interventionist. It should have become a question of like, is the Ukrainian struggle moral? And it sadly, that's the one thing I don't feel like we got to like go back and forth over. Funny how he said don't bring up history, then immediately brings up. I don't think he said don't bring up history, but I do feel like he was uncomfortable by the comparisons. Stop bringing up wars I like in hindsight. It shows my ideas are inconsistent. Yeah, that was pretty mean of me. That was very mean of me. Oh god, he said my chat doesn't like you. I wonder what his chat was all up on. Wonder how his chat was really doing.